Hello, everyone, and welcome to this show. This is our first show in 2023, so Happy New Year, everyone. I know some of you are dealing with very cold weather, so hi from sunny Puerto Rico. But I hope that you enjoyed the show today. We have James Ewart. He's going to be doing our current events, our headlines, because Mike Gregory is not with us today. We're going to have also Terry Joy. He's going to be doing our core body of knowledge. We are going to have today our third session with our 30 under 30, some of our honorees, so you can know our new generation. We are going to talk about standards, and we're going to talk also about valuation software. So I hope you enjoyed this show. And with this, I'm going to go and pass to James. James.
Thank you, Alina. Hi, everybody, and welcome from Charleston, South Carolina, where we're not quite as warm as Puerto Rico, but we're in the 60s today and having a great day. I'm Jim Ewart, not Michael Gregory. Everybody knows Michael, and he normally has this segment. He's not able to be here today, and he asked me to pinch hit, which it's my pleasure to do on his behalf. I am located, as I said, in Charleston, South Carolina, and this is my background. Today we're going to cover from BV Wire several topics. The first ever survey of young BVers provides us some insight that we find interesting and confirms what we have believed. We also have a second survey regarding Excel add-ins for the GPCM. OECD has released its fiscal or its final valuation guidance on crypto assets. Johnson Parks released their DLOM study. It's now available, and I suggest that it's something that we should have in our libraries. Private firms pay a median of $30,000 in board retainers for smaller companies, and then firm nimbleness as a measure of risk is the other topic that we're going to cover today. So our objectives are pretty straightforward, right? We want to take a look at and take to heart what our young BVers have to say. We also want to note the add-ins for the GPCM and the OECD guidance on crypto assets. The Johnson Parks study and the pay for boards and firm nimbleness as it relates to risk. Preliminary results of a new survey confirmed that most BV practitioners were not made aware of the profession in their early years. I know that was certainly the case for me. About 2/3 of the respondents in the survey say that they were not made aware of the profession in college at all, whether at the graduate or undergraduate level. And until now, we anecdotally, I guess, believe that many young practitioners discover BV accidentally, and this survey seems to back that up. The survey was conducted by BVR and the BV recruiting firm of Barham & Baker, and it was launched with the cooperation and support of the American Society of Appraisals. Respondents are ASA members under the age of 40, whose primary discipline is business valuation. The goal is to gain some insights and perspectives to help the profession better attract and develop younger generation of practitioners. The survey, highlights that we need to be more active and proactive, both with our alma maters as well as in our recruiting efforts, and with those schools that we do recruit from, to see if we cannot identify young professionals sooner and educate them as to the opportunity within our profession. The second survey revealed, and it's part of BVR's ongoing surveys related to data resources and methodologies And they ran a short survey relative to the use of Excel add-ins for the guideline company public company method, GPCM. And the survey generated about 50 respondents. And here's what they found. Almost half, 45% of the respondents used the GPC method in 50% of their valuations. Only 15% said that they never used the GPC method. Of those who used the method, 71% used an Excel add-in. The most commonly used add-ins are CapIQ and followed closely with Tagnify. Of those who use an add-in, 44% use it exclusively. That is, they don't do anything else. They just simply use the add-ins, download the data, and move on. But of those that do use something other than an add-in, it's primarily related to EdCurrent, the EdCC information, and Yahoo Finance for stock prices, presumably to verify their data. And of those currently not using an add-in at all, 100% of them say they would like to know more about the add-ins. These findings are pretty consistent with my practice as well. The Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, has published their final crypto asset reporting framework, and they refer to it as CARF, which provides for the automatic exchange of information between countries on crypto assets. These are intended as global standards, though the US is not likely to adopt them, and it's left to individual countries to apply them within their own jurisdictions. The final framework provides some guidance on hard-to-value assets through a tiered hierarchy of reference points. First, with reference to crypto asset service providers with their reference price and value, or alternatively, internal accounting book values. Prior to the release of the final rules based on responses to the final, I guess to the initial March 2022 draft, the OECD revised many provisions, including the definition of covered assets, the treatment of decentralized finance, DeFi's, platforms, and who would be required to report. The final rules include a new threshold of $50,000 for retail transaction reporting. And given all that's been going on in that space, I'm sure that these are some welcome guidance. The new study by Johnson Park, continues to show that investors demand 30 to 45% higher rates of return for the additional risk of holding a non-marketable investment or being exposed to increased risk over the holding period. The 2022 discount for lack of marketability study provides objective rates of return measures to implement the Johnson Park empirical method for determining a discount for lack of marketability for the valuation of interest in privately held corporations and partnerships. The 9-page report provides DLOM rate of return information, including a thorough explanation and example on how to apply this data. This methodology has been used in several court cases, including the First Family Limited Partnership case that had gone to trial. Practitioners often apply a fixed discount for lack of marketability without regard to the resulting effect on the rate of return. This practice is inconsistent with the fundamental concept of valuation, which requires risk to reward. To determine the size of the discount, the 3 rate of return studies in this report can be used to measure the increase in return required to compensate investors for the lack of marketability. To support adjustments for reasonable compensation when doing private company valuations, comparable data is necessary. And one source of private company board member compensation is the Private Company Board Compensation and Governance Survey conducted by Compensation Advisory Partners, CAP, and Family Business and Private Company Director magazines. The new 2022 third edition of the survey contains over 1,200 responses, an increase of about 300 participants from the prior full version of the survey in 2020. Board retainers are highly correlated with company size, the survey shows, ranging from a median of 20,000 at firms with less than 10 million in revenue to 65,000 at firms with greater than 1 billion in revenue. In addition to retainers, other elements of cash compensation for private company directors are annual travel reimbursements and in-person meeting fees provided by about half of the respondents to the survey. Investors perceive firms with higher levels of inflexibility, such as not being able to scale operations or adapt to changes in profitability, as being riskier and have a higher implied cost of equity. This research concluded on this new paper that was released. This paper was prepared, or I guess it's called The Firm Inflexibility and the Implied Cost of Equity, by a collaborative effort with the University of Alberta, University of South Carolina, and University of Ottawa. And I try to pronounce the names, but I would just butcher them, so I will not. And it confirms that what some would say is common sense, and that is that a firm with better ability to adjust to market conditions will fare better than one that cannot. So examining a large sample of manufacturing firms over a period of 1989 to 2018, the researchers' conclusions are consistent with prior similar research. They also found that the impact of firm inflexibility on the cost of equity capital is greater for smaller firms. The references for each of these is found here. And BVR Wire is published weekly by BVR Resources. The BV Update is published monthly by BV Resources. Of course, the Value Examiner, NAFTA CTI training summaries, valuation products and services, Internal Revenue Service, and other sources. Those are our typical sources for this segment of AVW. Alina, back to you.
Thank you, James, for your time. And to everyone, we have now our first poll question. So make sure that you respond to that one for your continuing education. And now, as our next segment, we're going to have Stephen White. He's going to be interviewing Terry Joy. And they're going to talk about how much is your share worth. Stephen?
I'm here. I am just trying to.
I know.
There we
it's
go.
Too cold, so that happened to your camera. I know. I understand that. You started this before the show.
I know I did. I know I did. I know I did. But you did enlighten me on something, which is interesting. And we're already today's the 23rd. It's the first time we've had the show. So happy New Year to everyone. Today, I get the distinct pleasure of going over this topic of how much is your share worth and valuing the interests of service firms. And our guest speaker today is Terry Lloyd. A number of you may be familiar with Terry. Terry is the managing director of FSG, which is Financial Scholars Group based in Utah. He's the managing director, and he's been handling complex valuations for probably over 40 years. I hate to put that number out there because I hate it when I hear how long we've been doing this. But his practice includes assignments and engagements involving tax, disputes, transaction. He's also a qualified expert in the federal and state courts. Terry as well as being in federal state courts, he's also an expert in international courts of arbitration and has testified for and against the IRS. So if there's anyone that I would say that is an expert in their field, Terry is definitely one of those individuals. I had the distinct pleasure of meeting him at one of our conferences a while back. Terry, good morning and welcome to Around the Valuation World.
Good morning, and thank you for that generous introduction. My mother would be delighted if you wrote it just the way she wrote it. So.
Well, my pleasure, my pleasure. Like I said, this is a very interesting and unique topic because of the mere fact that as our next partner, we do value service firms, and there's always something of a topic that we can all learn from. And I know today with our audience, I would honestly tell you, grab your notepad and a pen and paper, because we're going to do a little deeper dive into this overall process. So I'm already throwing you out there, Terry, just to go over this. But I guess the best way for us to start this is really to talk about, I know why, but explain to the audience, why do you believe this is a relevant topic for us to discuss?
If we go to that next slide, for a couple of reasons, let's start there.
Okay.
Services are an increasingly important part of the economy. As an economy matures and people's basic needs are met, food, shelter, clothing, things like that, then they're able to spend more of that discretionary income on services. Everything from investment advice to yoga or personal trainers or all kinds of things. And so you can see in the chart there, ever since the 1950s, as our economy, as our country has gotten richer, had more disposable income, people are spending more on those kinds of services. Service firms are becoming increasingly important. Maybe the best example is investment advisory. As the country becomes wealthier, as individuals become wealthier, now we're looking for advice, not only on our physical fitness, but on our financial fitness. So that's one part of it. Secondly, the FTC recently proposed eliminating non-compete agreements. And I think everybody in this audience knows the importance of non-compete agreements, especially as they relate to, sorry about that, especially as they relate to our customer lists, our client lists, separating from firms, things like that. And that leads us directly to the third reason for this, is many of us own interests or hold interests in professional services firms. If we depart, if we separate, if we transact, if we get divorced, what is the value of our interest in that entity? It's not an operating company. It's not a holding company. It's inherently attached to our services. And so we see a demand for this kind of work increasing over time.
So one of the things, and I'm a big chart person myself, and I'm glad that you're actually placed this here. I tend to like to reflect back on, right? We know what happened in 2020. You can see the dip in this overall chart, but then you gradually start to see a number of different things happening between 2020 to where we currently are now. You didn't talk about this, or you may have just kind of highlighted a little, the growth of where those consumptions are coming from. Is that part of that, would you say, is predicated more so on the stimulus packages, or do you think there was another factor in this as far as the spending of real goods and services?
That's an interesting question. I don't know the specific answer. I think the stimulus spending stimulated a lot of things. We're seeing the effects of that in inflation, in goods and services. So available money meant more of us could spend money on whatever we wanted.
Right.
Those who didn't need more or better food could now spend it on travel or yoga or whatever. And so I think the stimulus impacted all areas.
Okay. Now, looking at this particular field, there's always issues that we actually have to deal with. And from an evaluator's perspective, let's talk through, or walk through, I should say, some of the core issues that we're confronted with as evaluators when we're dealing with service industries.
The first one we've already talked about. The second one we'll talk about in more detail in just a few minutes, where people like us find a need for these services. But moving from that context into specifics, a couple of the things we talked about in December are some basic issues to any valuation. We need to understand the business. Is this a small mom and pop? Is this a partner in a big four firm?
Mhm.
Is the interest, what kind of a business are we looking at? And the real key issue when in these situations is who owns that customer relationship. We'll talk about this in more detail. But if you and I have relationships with clients, with customers,
Mhm.
is that a relationship we are representing for the firm, or is that more personal to us? We're just starting tax season. Many of us have a tax background. And so you say, when someone gets their tax return done, do they just go to H&R Block and get who's ever next available? They've got a
Right.
couple of W-2s and a mortgage statement, some interest income. Or is it the kind of business, is it the kind of relationship that's much more personal, that there's a CPA that the family has been dealing with for 20 years or 30 years, and they've seen children come and go. They've helped us through divorces, through
Mhm.
our business succession, things like that. The question is, the value of that interest may or may not depend on who owns the customer relationship. If Stephen White left the firm, probably most of the clients would follow him, which suggests there isn't a lot of value in the firm, that the goodwill, that customer relationship, is inherent in Stephen. A couple of key points again for any valuation engagement. Define carefully what is the subject interest. What is it actually we're valuing here? Is it just the lawyer's right to practice there? Does it require a license to practice dermatology or whatever in that particular practice group? A neighbor of mine actually manages a psychiatric practice, and those relationships are very intimate, uh,
Mhm.
along the lines of an OBGYN. Now, I might not care as much about who cuts my hair, but if I'm going to see a therapist, then I really care about who that is.
Sure. Sure.
Um, and the last point here is define the standard of value up front. And I use the word confirm here because if we're in tax court, it's fair market value. If we're in family law court or Section 2000 in California, those are different standards of value, and those are not usually set by us, but we agree with everybody up front. I'm going to determine the fair market value or the fair value or whatever standard is applied in that circumstance. This is the standard of value, and then we define it. This is what
Mhm.
it means so that nobody's surprised at the end.
It's interesting going over these things. We as valuators, we know these are the things that we need to do, and we should understand the business that we're working on. And the goodwill is obviously a unique topic to talk about, and we'll discuss that a little further in this presentation. But just the subject matter, the subject interest, and the standard of value, sometimes we take for granted. But if we need to have a clearer understanding of states, that every state is a little different. New Jersey is different than California or in New Hampshire or things of that nature. I strongly encourage, and I love how you place in there confirm. That is a very important part. Now we've talked about the service side of it. We know that the sector, I should say, services is a very large part of the overall economy. For us valuators, maybe we should jump in to find out where can we find this type of work as far as where professional services firms are located and how we can find them.
Okay. And let's start with the traditional ones. When we think of professionals, we think lawyers, doctors, CPAs, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Those are traditional, and we see firms in those areas of all sizes. But increasingly, we're seeing more and more, say, in the consulting area, including IT, web design, things like that. A very interesting one, at least from a professional perspective, is money management. If I'm with a broker, say a large broker like Merrill or Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, somebody like that, or if I'm with a little boutique, money management and the securities industry and securities law are kind of a niche area of themselves. Most money management firms have very strict non-compete agreements or
Mm-hmm.
an understanding, and they will tell everybody, the client, the advisor, This is who owns the client files. This is who owns the relationship. They police very carefully the interaction between the advisor and the customer, and they pursue that very strenuously in most cases. You are not allowed to download customer data onto a zip drive or any other source. And so, especially in the securities industry, the securities firms generally, the advisory firms, very strictly enforce the idea that this is our customer and you happen to be assigned to that account. So money management is one area we see more and more with education or training firms, especially those that are offering some kind of web-based training, things like that. Again, others we might not normally think of: marketing, ad agencies, web design. And more we see firms, even in our field, that provide temp or what I call brokerage services of people, matching buyers and sellers of professional services. One of our other neighbors works in an area they call locum, where they're trying to place physicians on a temporary 3 or 4 month contract. A lot of doctors and nurses will actually work 3, 4, 6 months in one location and then literally move around. So a firm like that brokers people and not investments, but if you get a big enough Rolodex or client base and customer base, then there's some value in that.
Now,
And
do you
we'll just-
find, do you find non-competes, even though they're temp services, but it's their client list that they actually have and valuing the overall business, or not necessarily? I'm just trying to wrap my head around, because this is a new one. When I saw that on your bullet points, I was interested to know a little bit more about how this is structured different than, let's just say, the education or the training.
It will vary depending on the size of the firm. What I have seen is that the bigger the firm, the more protective they are about who owns what. And I've actually been through those negotiations with firms about, if you leave, which clients can you contact? And in most cases, the existence or the fact that there's a non-compete in place tells me consideration or value has been exchanged. I accept this upfront offer, including this origination bonus or whatever, as a part of my agreement that I won't solicit when I leave. And so the non-compete tends to be more common as the firms get bigger and they've got more clients to protect, and providers are coming and going.
Okay. But we have a question from the audience. What is the best source of identifying the standard of value, which may also depend upon the intended use, tax court, family court, et cetera?
What's the best source? And I'm speaking from my experience. In many cases, our clients are lawyers, and so there will be an established venue or standard. If I'm dealing with a tax lawyer, then I'll make sure up front. And when we talked about confirming, we first confirm with the client, and then we confirm with everybody else. But typically that is established by the venue. If I'm in a FINRA arbitration, if I'm in tax court, if I'm in family court, and Stephen, you mentioned the differences. In California, there's something called Section 2000, and where they refer to their fair value. Typically, that's generally understood to mean pro rata value. So that if the Stephen and Terry firm breaks up, or I'm suing for dissolution, which means you have to buy me out, then we say it's fair value, which I understand to mean the following. Here's my understanding of how we define that standard of value. But usually the answer to the question is usually that's defined for us by the venue. If there's any question, if you're the neutral, certainly we define it with everybody. But if there's any question, speak to the client. If you're the neutral, confirm it with the court, something like that.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Alan, for that question. Now, the other area where you can find it, you have down here engineering and construction management. Let's talk about some of the basic services that are actually needed.
And here's where we just kind of talked about this again, where there's a dissolution or a litigation or bankruptcy. We've been involved in cases where a law firm has gone bankrupt and somebody has attempted to come back and make a claim against withdrawals or movements of clients from an insolvent firm, with financing and transactions. And this is an area I'd be interested to hear James, with his tax background, if he wants to jump in on this one at a later moment. But and I'm not offering tax advice here, but if somebody
Definitely
buys
not
this,
on my side either.
okay. But if somebody buys the Stephen and Terry consulting firm,
Mhm.
but the Stephen and Terry firm doesn't own the list or doesn't have a non-compete, it doesn't own the customer list, it doesn't own the trademark, the trade dress, the recipes, the formulas, the algorithms, whatever it is, if somebody's just buying our firm, which probably is desks and computers, and maybe there's a leasehold, stuff like that.
Mhm.
But if Stephen and Terry have in their heads or in their persons formulas, recipes, trade secrets, things like that, if Stephen and Terry agree to sell to the buyer separately, our best efforts under a non-compete agreement, things like that, that personal goodwill is a capital asset, as I understand it. James, feel free to jump in here. But there is an important distinction to be made about what is Stephen's personal goodwill, Terry's personal goodwill, and the value of all the other assets. So an interesting area for those of us who work there.
Mhm.
Family law, this frequently comes up. If a partner in a Big Four firm is getting divorced, what's the value of the interest in that firm? If a partner in a smaller CPA firm gets divorced, what is the value of her interest in that firm? Estate planning, you can give interests in consulting firms. If you own an interest in a consulting or a service firm when you pass, there could be some value there. And
Mhm.
again, the one we talked about previously, how much is the value in my firm for my personal estate planning, if we're going to sell the firm, things like that.
Right. I do want to go back to dissolution, and someone in the chat box submitted in a question. Can you have a dissolution that would not be an asset base via orderly liquidation firms? Income and market approaches would be precluded by definition.
I'd agree with that one. If we're
Mhm.
insolvent, if we're dissolving, and that's, if time allows, we'll talk about that one. There's some famous cases there. But if the firm's insolvent, most of the real value in professional services firms are the customer relationships. It's not the files, it's not the desks, it's not the trademarks. There are exceptions.
Mhm.
Most of the value is in the customer relationships. And when the firm goes insolvent, Stephen may take his customers with him, Terry takes his customers with him, and so on. But by definition, there's nothing else really there. We got the accounts receivable. By definition, there's no goodwill in the firm if the liabilities exceed the assets.
That's an excellent point. So now we get a chance to jump into something that's near and dear to me when we're talking about the actual relationship. You mentioned something about if I were to leave my firm, I could take my clients. My prior firm before I started on Partners Group, I had to start from scratch because I couldn't take those clients over. No matter how many ESOP clients that we were working on or M&A clients that we worked on, I couldn't take them. I had to build my own relationships and move forward from there. And I think that's something that we're all confronted with when we are valuing companies, of understanding who owns those particular client relationships. So why don't we do a deeper dive into the goodwill aspect of it, if you like?
Okay, and again, we've touched on this question a couple of times. There's
Mhm.
different definitions. I like this one. It's as good as any. And again, is the goodwill resident in me or in the firm? If I'm an audit partner at a Big Four firm auditing Microsoft or Disney or somebody else, to a large degree, I'm just a practitioner working on the firm's account, on the firm's client. But if I'm Stephen White, there is a much more personal relationship with the clients, and the clients probably would follow me. And again, here, if we're valuing an interest in the firm, we need to make sure we distinguish between the value inherent in Stephen and the value inherent in his firm.
Mhm.
Larger firms tend to see more value in the firm. Smaller firms tend to see more value in the practitioner. Once firms get to a certain size, the practitioners can become kind of interchangeable. yes, I want a certain partner assigned to my account, but the big firms will rotate partners through. They'll certainly rotate staff through, but who owns that relationship? And if the practitioner controls or owns that relationship, then there's probably not much value in the firm if the practitioners still have that relationship. To the extent the practitioners are simply working on the firm's accounts or customers, there's probably not a whole lot of individual goodwill there, and there is goodwill value in the firm.
Right. Again, I think that's one of the things that we often, as valuators, especially those that are new in this particular space, it's good to have a refresher to discuss that side of it. Now, moving along, because we only have a few more minutes left, and I would like to jump into discussing some of the high-profile cases that have been pertaining to this particular area.
Given our limited time, let's go to that next to last one down there at the bottom. When Andersen imploded 20 odd years ago, there was actually a risk that the bankruptcy court would come after the Andersen partners' individual assets. They would go after their homes. Clearly, their capital accounts were gone, but Andersen suffered a great hit, a loss of real value there. But over time, a bunch of former Andersen partners have now actually resurrected that name. And this is one of those examples that proves the standard is not always true. That is, Andersen Tax is now Andersen. They have resurrected that name 20 years later and shown that for some buyers, there still is value in that firm's brand name. And again, there's a history of law firms and accounting firms that have gone bankrupt, never to be resurrected. The individual practitioners take those relationships with them. But here's one where there is still some enduring value in that brand name, in the firm's goodwill.
You know, that's a unique one because when UBS acquired Paine-Webber, they still own that name, Paine-Webber. And during some of the earlier crises, the thought was that they were actually going to use that name again because it was a name that a number of U.S. investors were familiar with and they were comfortable with, to separate themselves from the name. So there's another example of where that goodwill comes into play.
For us sports fans, if you look at the image on the left, you see a kind of a standard play at the plate. There's a runner crossing the plate and the catcher's about to make the catch and maybe make the tag. But if we look a little closer, whoever thought we would see on a catcher's chest protector a logo of a guy playing basketball who hasn't played for over 20 years? And so talking about the enduring value of brands, the Michael Jordan brand within the Nike family of brands is one of the more impressive co-branding efforts. And I think that's where we find ourselves, especially with bigger law firms and accounting firms. There is something of a co-branding going on there. That figure on the right shows us that those relationships can also be less than productive. Many of you may remember recently that Kanye West and Adidas separated after some controversial comments he made. So again, the idea of branding the individual with the enterprise.
So my last question for you, as we wrap up, what are the important things for appraisers to keep in mind when they're valuing service firms or interest in them?
Let's go back to those points we talked about originally.
Sorry.
You were there.
There we go.
There we go. Skipping down to the last four there, who owns the customer relationship? Where does the goodwill reside? There's the real value in a service firm, is that customer relationship. Is it the firm? Is it the individual? Clearly and carefully define upfront, what is the subject interest? What does it entitle someone to do? If it's just the right to practice there, if I'm just parking my license at that firm, there may not be a lot of value separately in the interest. Confirm with everyone up front and throughout, especially if you're the neutral. Confirm this is the standard of value and this is what I'm attempting to do. Even some of the more sophisticated triers of fact may not appreciate those differences. Last point, clearly communicate your calculations and conclusions. Write summaries, give graphics, show the calculations, educate your reader.
Well, thank you very much, Terry. I know that we could go on for some time now, but I appreciate your time. We have a lot of other exciting things to go over. There's a polling question that just popped up, and I see Alina jumping in now. Terry, thank you again.
Stephen, my pleasure. Good seeing you again.
Thank you, Stephen and Terry. It was great having you today. As Stephen mentioned, we have our polling questions, so make sure you respond to that. And now we have one of the sessions that this is our third one. We have one in September, one in November, and this is our last one. And it's a session that we have called Rising Stars, where we are interviewing some of our honorees, the 30 under 30s honorees. And this was our first class. So I'm really happy to have them today. Because as you may know, the idea is to recognize those new professionals that have some accomplishments. Because sometimes we may be older, we may complain about millennials and senials and Gen Z and how they are and how they produce. But you know what? There is a new generation ready to learn and excel in what they do. And we can pass the baton to them, and we can also be mentors to them. So I am more than happy to present to you two of our 30 under 30 inaugural class honorees. We have Christopher and Nick with us today. Hi, guys.
Hi, Alina. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How about you?
Good.
It's great having you today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a little bit about you and what you do. So can you tell us about your firm, area specialty, and how you got on this profession?
Chris, you want me to go first? I'll go first. So I've been with this firm for 7 years now, my entire career.
What's your firm name?
The Gabriel McNulty Campanella. So it's a boutique CPA firm. We do forensics and tax as far as services are concerned. How I got to this firm is actually a bit of a funny story. So my college does a 5-year accounting program, and it does a forensics track. So, before I got into my graduate degree and, started the program, I was looking into it because, I always thought either accounting, taxes or auditing. That's about it, right? So no one had any idea what forensics was. So I did some research and I really liked it. So, I decided maybe I wanted to make a pivot to forensics. And, surprisingly so, not a lot of firms, not a lot of accounting firms advertise or recruit for forensics. It's always auditing. So I didn't really know where to go. So one of the partners, who happens to be a professor at the school I went to him for advice. I said, hey, I really like this forensic area of accounting. How do I get into it? So he said, and I was a student of his. He knew I was one of his better students. So he hands me a card. He says, call this number. Next thing you know, it's HR, and I'm getting an interview, and I've been here ever since. But as far as area of expertise that we do, we don't necessarily specialize in one area of forensics. The good part about this firm is that I've seen from business valuations, business interruptions, economic damage, and so forth. So I've got my hand in a lot of different things. But I will say that the most consistent thing we see that come across my table is economic damages, specifically wrongful terminations. So I deal with those all the time.
You do a lot of litigation support.
Yes.
Okay, it's sad to hear that things haven't changed in probably 20 years plus, because I remember I was one of the 40 under 40 honorees of the inaugural class. I cannot be that anymore. I'm from 43, and things haven't changed. I remember when I was studying, it was always audit and taxes. I don't like that. But yeah, we need to do some work, making sure that the new generation, they understand that this is not only bookkeeping, audit, and taxes. There's a lot of things to do that are more interesting, such as forensics and valuations. So thank you, Nick.
Yep.
Christopher, how about you?
Yeah. So my story is actually somewhat similar to yours, Nick. But my name is Chris. I'm a managing director at Stone Turn. Stone Turn's a sort of global advisory firm that broadly falls under the forensic accounting practice and a lot of different services that we offer within that wide umbrella. And I've been here 7, coming up on 8 years. And I started as an intern and have been here ever since. And similar to what you were saying, Nick, when I was in school, the recruiting is heavy on auditing. You don't hear about anything else. The on-campus recruiting, they don't even talk about any of the other practice areas, right? Obviously, the big four have wide service areas and other regional firms. And I had just found an internship that was here in the forensics. It sounded interesting. I had not heard of it. And I really enjoyed the sort of unique situations and the variety of work. And that's what I stuck around and kept doing for the last 7+ years.
So are you doing also valuations or just forensic?
Yes. So my practice area, I focus in our valuations team. And I do a lot of, business disputes, economic damages type cases, and a lot of post-acquisition dispute work as well. So that's sort of my specialty, less so on accounting specific and investigation type issues and more on the valuation and economic damages.
Okay. So what it was like to receive the notification that you have been nominated and selected as an honoree, Chris?
Yeah, sure. It was definitely unexpected, and I was very honored to hear about that. So the way the process sort of worked for me is one of the partners here at our firm had told me that I was going to be submitted as a potential candidate, and that was an honor in itself. And just from doing this work on a daily basis, there's so many other skilled peers that we have, and to be honest, I wasn't really expecting to be selected, given how many skilled people there are doing this. So I was excited and honored when I got the email saying that I had been selected.
And it is always, important for us to be recognized for those that we work for, right?
Yes.
Because if they submitted your recommendations, because they respect you as a professional. So that's great.
Exactly.
And unique.
Yeah,
How was it for you?
One of the partners here did nominate me, but I had no idea that he nominated. Zero. It was about 8 o'clock or so at night. I got a text message from him saying, check your email. And it was a link from NACPA saying I became a nominee. And, like Chris, I was ecstatic. It came right at the end of the year. So it kind of, put a little fire in me, to start the new year. I feel very gracious and, honored to be a part of it, this community and being selected for it. So, it was definitely a big motivator, and it continues to motivate me going forward. So hopefully I get, the 40 under 40 and move, be a part of the category as I progress through my ages.
We've been talking about doing something like 50 and over, something like that. Mel, I don't think he's here yet, but the co-host, we are always joking about that. So, and as young professionals, what are the challenges that you face with your practice, and which advice will you give to those entering the profession?
You want me to go first, Chris, or?
Sure.
All right. So the biggest challenge I think I've experienced to date, we're a small boutique firm, so it's, there's not many layers of, divisions of, manager and partner, so I'm very hands-on in cases. At this level, I'm almost doing everything from start to finish. And in the right, I'm sure Chris can speak to a lot of times in forensics and, valuation stuff, it's not black and white, right? It's not, it's not taxes where, you have, here's your tax law, follow it accordingly. There's many different areas and approaches and data you have to comb through. And, a lot of times in the beginning, it was almost like paralysis by analysis, where I wanted to be right. I wanted to, I didn't know where to start. Obviously, of course, I didn't utilize, the partners and mentors as much because I wanted to be like the person, hey, look what I found, without anyone's help kind of thing. So, that was definitely something that I had to, get over, and it was an obstacle and definitely a weakness that I had to overcome. But, as far as, being a young professional, that was definitely my biggest challenge, because you could definitely go down a rabbit hole with, with the information, in this field.
Yeah, but I just want to make sure to mention to the both of you and to other young professionals that are hearing us right now and watching us, and that may be doing it via YouTube in the future, that with an ACVA, you can call them, and there's a lot of us that can assist you and mentoring you, do some mentoring. So anytime that you need support, you have us as a team, so that is great with an ACBA and the association, the members. I have feel that in the past year, so I can tell you that it works. So Chris?
Yeah, I had similar thoughts, Nick. I agree with what you were saying. I think it's important to find a mentor or mentors early on in your career, and someone that can help you sort of manage those expectations and sort of tips and tricks and how to deal with large volumes of documents or complex analyses and how to approach those different things, just so you aren't overwhelmed. And I guess to take a step further, a slightly different thought is starting the business development early on in your career, I think is important and a challenging piece, right? For the most part, the work we do is something that most people can learn and understand, but the hardest part is sort of finding the clients to put the trust in you and making that part of your daily routine from the get-go, I think is extremely important, because you can be the best business valuation analyst in the world, but if there's no clients out there for you to help with, it can be challenging.
Have you feel sometimes that clients, they don't respect you in some way because you are too young?
Yeah, definitely. I think you sort of get that question, is there anyone else joining this meeting, or is it just you, or is the partner joining? So it's something that you have to deal with to some extent, and there is a little bit where it just does take time and age to get over it, but I think sort of being the person that's in the details and knows all the answers to the questions, even if you have to let somebody else speak first, but just being able to know the specific numbers and fill in the details and be able to chime in is a way to sort of combat that and build trust and show that what's going on in small pieces while still respecting the client.
Yeah, I agree with Chris with that. There's a lot of time, but I think that's a problem right in the beginning, right? If you know what you're doing, you're good, and the client sees that, they don't, at that point, the age, barrier is gone, right? There's a lot of times where my partner will sit in and then, he's like, listen, I'm here, but Nick will be taking over in your day to day. And then, I start giving them advice and moving forward. The next thing you know, if they retain us for another case, they don't even reach out to the party anymore. They're, directly. But that is definitely a problem, the first time you meet them. But after they start realizing, the type of work and the knowledge you have and present to the client, I think that means nothing after that.
So let me ask you this, Nick. There are a lot of prejudice with these new generations, right? Millennials and Z, because I keep hearing people talking about millennials and they don't understand that Generation Z is already there in the workforce. So what would you like for the maverick and established professionals in this profession to know about your work and expectations for the future?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there is a lot of prejudice. Everyone says that we're lazy, right? We don't work as hard, or we don't want to be in the office all the time. Everyone wants to work from home. Instant gratification. I mean, you name it. But I just feel like every previous generation says the same thing about the next generation. So I next thing we'll be talking about how the next generation's lazy. So I mean, there always going to be some prejudice with the the following generation. But I mean, I got my CPA, I have my master's, CVA, in June. I got my CFF. So, I'm not just getting these designations as education for no reason, right? I take this very seriously. I like to say it's not a job, it's a career. And, it doesn't stop, the education doesn't stop, development doesn't stop, I mean? And, I will agree that there are some, my generation can tend to be lazy, but, to a certain degree, people say that's a good thing, right? If they're lazy, those individuals might find shortcuts or shorter ways to get things done rather than taking the long approach. So, I mean, I think just the older generation needs to, be able to work with us because, we're just a completely different generation as far as, our how we work in the office and, our approach to things. And, everyone has to realize we're all a team, we're not against each other. Right. I mean, and the problem I find is that usually the older generation is always like, well, you got to pay your dues, right? I did it, so you have to do it. And it's like, that doesn't always have to be the case. I mean, things can change and people can adapt.
I'm not a millennial and I love working from home. So at this point, it doesn't have to do with probably with the generations, but yeah, I agree. I have a partner, she's older than me, and she's like, oh, we should be, working from the office. So
Yeah.
I guess it will depend, but you're right on that. And what about you, Chris?
Yeah, I think sort of two things. One, it's a little bit unfair to put the entire generation into one bucket, right? Obviously, there's a large population of diverse individuals in the millennial and Gen Z, and not everyone operates the same and is maybe subject to the same quote unquote issues that are put out there. And like Nick said, just because something was done one way in the past doesn't mean that that's how it has to be done going forward, right? Change can be a good thing. I think there's always going to be issues with the new generation, but from my perspective, my peers and those coming in below me, I don't know that I still see that people care about the work and take themselves seriously. Maybe slightly shifting priorities on work-life balance and being flexible in terms of location, but I don't think those are bad things, right? I don't see a broad theme, at least in my experience, that nobody cares about the work and nobody tries or wants to learn. It's just, slightly different view on values and the timing associated with those. So, there's an adjustment there, but it's a broad team on projects and engagements. I think it's just something that everyone has to adapt to in both directions.
That is great. Sorry if you hear a background noise. But so we are finishing our segment. So do you have any advice for other young professionals?
I guess.
Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, sure. I think my advice is, early on in your career when you're starting out is to be available, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean overextending yourself, but being someone who's seen as dependable, willing to say yes to things, particularly on the business valuation and the forensic side of things. Not every task or piece of a project is the most exciting work that everyone wants to do. But there is a bit of, you have to understand how that works in order to take on the next piece and sort of establish yourself on some of that entry level stuff before you can move on. So just, being someone that's seen as dependable, available, willing to chip in to the team. I think that goes a long way.
Yep. I agree.
What about
Chris.
you, Nick?
I mean, one thing I would, if I had to give some advice, something, Chris said earlier that I think is one of the most important things is having a mentor. I mean, luckily my mentor is my partner. So like, if you could have a mentor who you work with, that's two birds with one stone. But, having a mentor is so important in my opinion. You want to walk through life, with no, someone, you want someone to tell you the things they did wrong, so you're not making those mistakes, right? And give you direction and help you down your path, because life is tough and this work is not easy and you can get lost in it, and it's very important to find someone that's a mentor. And like kind of like Chris said, make yourself available. More success comes when when more opportunities present itself, right? So if another team members need some help, always extend a hand. Don't overextend yourself to where you're working all day every day, but be open to learn new things and don't be scared to get out of your comfort zone. And good things will come to you. You'd be surprised.
That is great. It's nice to hear that. Someone mentioned in the chat that it's difficult to jump right into forensics and business valuation if you don't have a solid foundation in tax audit and bookkeeping. But I believe that it will depend on your mentors that you mentioned, if they can guide you through it, especially if you have a good base on whatever education you had. I guess it will depend on the professionals. But guys, it was great having you today. I'm so glad to see young professionals that are excelling on this profession. And I'm happy to have had you today, and I hope to see you soon in one of our conferences so we can chat in person and have a good time there.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, definitely. We appreciate the time and happy to be here and part of this community.
Thank you, both of you. So now we're going to pass to, before we have our next polling question. And we are going to pass to, so make sure you respond to that. Now we're going to have pass to Alan Zipp. He's going to be interviewing the judges, and they are going to be talking today about how can a valuation expert assist in settling valuation dispute or even lead settlement discussions.
Well, thank you, Alina, very much.
Thank you, Alan.
This is a very special segment with the judges today. At the NACVA Business Valuation and Financial Litigation Super Conference last December, this panel of judges presented rather extensive discussions on litigation topics of interest to our members. Well, one presentation discussed cases that should have settled but didn't. Another presentation was of alternate dispute resolution and mediation issues. These sessions were so well received by the participants at the Super Conference that the editors of Around the Valuation World decided to present key issues from that conference to our webinar viewers in several segments. Well, they asked me to conduct this interview of the judges, discussing highlights from the December Super Conference on the issue of cases that should have settled but did not, and how the business valuation expert can assist in case settlement. Then future interviews with the judges will include additional segments from that NACVA Super Conference. Good day, Your Honors.
Alan, how are you?
And a very good afternoon to you, Alan. A very good afternoon to you, Judge Yates. And I think we speak on behalf of Judge Platt. Well, we don't speak totally on behalf of him, but he won't be with us today. So I apologize to those who were tuning in for Judge Platt. But Judge Yates and I, we can do a pretty nice harmony together, I hope.
I think you'll do great. I'm looking forward to this. Trust you can see my screen, so I'm going to move it along. The question really is how the business valuation expert can assist in case settlement. And my bio is here if anybody wants to see it. And then Judge Driscoll's bio, as well as Judge Platt and Judge Yates. The issue here, focusing directly in the question, is why hasn't this case settled? And there's a number of issues that you all discussed at the conference in December. One would dealt with expert witnessing skills or knowledge and information available to the parties, and then problems articulating positions. Can you discuss these issues and help us understand what we can do to help?
Sure. And thank you again, Alan. Thank you for putting these slides together, and thank you to all of the participants for tuning in to be with us, because I know I speak for Judge Yates and for Judge Platt that we get so much out of this, both in preparation for each of our AVW segments, as well as for the Super Conference, as well as from meeting all of you when we are live and in person. So, starting out with why this case hasn't settled, I think we have to get to the question before that, which is, why should this case settle? And just about every case should settle. And the reasons they should settle, well, we can look at the 30,000-foot view, which is that every trial is a failed settlement. So you could take that sort of definition away. I think I stole that from Judge Yates or Judge Platt over the years. But systemically, cases have to settle. If every case went to trial, then we would be even more overwhelmed and overburdened than we are now. And by the way, we trial judges. I guess I'm the only trial judge, because Judge Yates' full-time assignment is now appellate, although his heart is very much still with the trial bench, as he's always shared with me. Cases have to settle because of the incredible backlogs that we have, really as a result of COVID. In my courthouse alone in suburban Long Island, there's about a 6 to 8 year backlog of cases ready to be tried. Not business cases, but all cases overall. So really cases have to settle. They have to settle also for the litigants because of the time, the energy, the money that is spent on litigation, and then add the emotional investment in the cases that so many of you are involved in, which are often family disputes or friends who are like family who started their own business together and now are going in separate directions. Finally, from the judge's perspective, from the trial judge's perspective, I am affirmed on 100% of the cases I settle. Or put another way, all's well that ends. So cases that settle end. So there really is an important institutional goal in that. Before we even get to that, why hasn't this case settled? And with that, I'll turn it over to Judge Yates. Judge Yates, of course, is an appellate judge, so he may answer the question Alan asked. He may answer the question that he wants to answer too. So,
Judge Driscoll's right that my heart is still in the trial court. I spent 10 years running a business docket, and I still think of myself as a business court judge. Let me amplify a couple of the points that Judge Driscoll made. The first one is that you can always get an answer from the court. As a matter of fact, my business court was pretty current on trials, but it's expensive to get that answer. And the answer may not be something you want at all. But in any event, the transaction costs associated with going through a trial are so great that usually the parties should be close enough that the difference between the two sides is far less than what the cost of trying the case would be. The second point I want to make is that as far as resolving cases and why they don't settle, one of the biggest mistakes I made when I started running the business docket was assuming that in commercial litigation, everybody would be a perfectly rational actor and emotions would never get in the way and they would never cloud judgment. Boy, was I wrong about that. It's extraordinary to me how many cases I wound up trying to the bench where we reached a result at the end that I, for all practical purposes, had predicted for the parties early on. And as a result of that, because I've had so many bad experiences with clouded judgment by clients and to a lesser extent, their attorneys, I tried to reach out as often as I could to broaden the discussion at settlement conferences to see if we could get experts involved who could talk sense to the people who were being so obstinate in the face of evidence that was pretty clear about where we were going to end up. And so I think you'll hear from Judge Driscoll, you'd hear from Judge Platt, and you'll hear from me that more and more we believe strongly that experts should be involved in settlement discussions.
Well, then moving to the next issue here is what advice can you give to the business valuation expert to be helpful in assisting with the settlement of a case? And then to whom should the expert direct their efforts at settlement? Should it be the judge, the attorney, the mediator, or the party directly?
So let's start with the first question, which is the advice. And I want to pick up and echo and actually really echo directly what Judge Yates said, which is that you are there to talk sense. And there's so much in that statement. You're there to be the honest person in the room. I know we're all honest, but you're not there to be an advocate. You're there to you're not there to be the attorney. So with that, let the attorney be the attorney. I would say that the efforts initially to whom you direct your efforts be towards the attorney that's retained you for a number of reasons. One is the attorney has retained you. That attorney is paying you. I'm not in the customer service business, nor is Judge Yates, but you all are to some extent because you're trying to make sure that they who are paying you are satisfied with you. So I think the initial point of contact, initial point of entry is the attorney for your purposes, but also for our purposes as judges. Lawyers and judges speak a certain way. We have a certain vocabulary. The vocabulary that you all speak is a different vocabulary. It's a vocabulary that, thanks to all of you, we can speak a little bit, but we can't speak as well as you. So we often need the attorney saying things initially, or the attorney being the point of contact, one. Second is, as all of you know from having been in courtrooms, a courtroom is not a free-for-all. It's not the Jerry Springer show or whatever other talk shows are on now. So I'm not comfortable with everyone just speaking whatever they want. I usually like things flowing through counsel. And the benefit of that is that counsel know, because they're familiar with me, whether on this case or on many cases over the 15 years I've been on the bench, they they know how to speak Driscollese. So I think the first entry point of contact is the attorney who retains you. But again, don't be afraid to say to the attorney, hey, I have something to say and I can help with this process. Again, I can help bring this case to resolution. So don't be afraid to have your elbows out a little bit. But the first point of contact, I think, is very much the retaining attorney.
And I would say this about settlement conferences. I suspect that Judge Driscoll and almost all trial judges conduct their settlement conferences as I do, which is to offer some comments to everybody at the beginning to just outline the process, and then essentially engage in shuttle diplomacy, where I'm going back and forth from one Zoom room or one actual conference room to another. And so roughly half the time when you're at a settlement conference, the judge isn't in the room with you. It's just you and the retaining counsel and the client. And that's where we judges hope that you'll be able to make strides in talking sense to the client and the retaining counsel. You know valuation much better than anybody else in the case, including the judge. And so you'll know from the cues that we're giving when we come in and talk to your side where we believe some ground should be given. And you're really the honest broker in the room when we're not there, who can tell the retaining counsel and or the client, look, it's a perfectly reasonable outcome to settle this case for $700,000. I know, client, that you think this is $1 million case, but for lots of reasons, based upon my analysis, I think that $700,000 is a perfectly reasonable outcome here. And if we can get the judge to drag the other side of that number, I'm not saying we should give the number up right now, but that would be a fine place to land. And I always hope and expect that when we include experts, they'll be the rational person who will essentially be on our side when we're not in the room, trying to get everybody to a number that makes sense for both sides.
Well done. What is the proper role then for the expert witness to assist in case settlement? And how should the expert witness work with the mediator in offering settlement suggestions? How to do this?
So again, through retaining it, make sure if you're going to speak directly to the mediator, I think you got to make sure that you have the blessing of the attorney who's retaining you. You don't want to do their job. You don't want to be an advocate, and you probably want to have other cases that attorney either calls you for or refers to her friends to call you for. So I think it's important to have that simpatico with retaining counsel. How does the expert work with the mediator in offering settlement suggestions? I think that often depends on the dynamic of the mediator, and everyone's got an ego. So I would say to be a teacher without being a pedantic teacher, without being overly professorial, which I think is a good lesson for all of us to have, even your humble Judge Driscoll and your humble Judge Yates as we present now, that you don't want to come in and be the person who knows everything. Oh, mediator, let me tell you about discounted cash flow because I'm not sure you understand it. All right. That's not the approach. It really is a step-by-step approach where, again, you're not advocating for a position, you're advocating for the intellectual honesty of what it is you're saying.
And I want to agree completely with Judge Driscoll's characterization. You never want to be speaking out of turn when you're speaking to the mediator or to the judge, depending on whether it's a mediation or a settlement conference, because it seems to me that if you're going to try to move your retaining counsel or the client away from a position that they adhere to, you have to do that in a private conversation. And as I say, about 50% of either a mediation or a settlement conference allows you the latitude of a private conversation with them. I try, when I run a settlement conference, never to put an expert in the firing line by demanding the expert say something that, if the expert's honest, will draw the ire of retaining counsel or the client or both. And so you have to do that delicate dance. I want to know what you think. And often I want you to pipe up and say what you think, because I think it will facilitate resolution. But I think Judge Driscoll probably would take the same approach that I would by never putting you on the spot where you have to commit to a number in front of me without clearing it first with your retaining counsel and the client. And oftentimes when I can see some hesitation in an expert to speak, my immediate reaction will be, why don't I give you 10 minutes to talk about it and I'll come back.
Very good.
And recognize we are looking as judges, we're looking for that inflection point. We're looking for anything that gives us an entry. So even the look from the expert to counsel that is different from the look from counsel back to the expert, even those 10 minutes are giving Judge Yates and me an entry point to get in and see the seam, SEAM, that might lead to settlement. So I guess the tie-in is have your poker face on in front of the judge, because we really
Right.
Judge Yates used two terms that I'd like to elaborate on. One was the judicial settlement conference, and the other was the mediation process. And I think our viewers would appreciate understanding the difference and the how we can be involved in both of those processes.
Judge Yates, will you start that and I'll supplement?
Sure. Why don't I explain, first of all, what a settlement conference looks like, because I've run so many of them, and that's completely familiar to me. What happens in a settlement conference is the judge, and it's either going to be the judge who's going to try the case if it's a jury trial, or more likely some other judge if it's going to be a bench trial, because I was always fairly hesitant to get involved in settlement conferences if I were going to be the trier of fact if settlement didn't materialize. But in all of those cases, what I'm doing is I'm giving an initial introduction and then going back and forth between the two sides. But because I'm a judge, my time is limited. And so even though I'm free in the sense that I don't cost anything, every hour I've spent with you trying to settle your case is an hour I can't spend doing something else. And so for me, there's a trade-off I have to make. And typically I won't go more than about 3 hours on a settlement conference, even in really complex cases. Mediation's different in the sense that a mediator is almost always being paid, usually a fairly handsome sum per hour, to listen to you and try to get to a resolution by pulling you both there. Now, there's something called facilitative mediation, where the mediator is supposed to just go back and forth and get the parties to try to move. And then there's something called evaluative mediation, where after spending hours, the mediator will tell both sides, this is where I think this case ought to come out. There's a school of thought, which I don't like, that if you're doing facilitative mediation, you should never agree to be evaluative at the end of the process. But mediation, just as a general rule, involves a great deal of expenditure of time. Mediators don't mind. They're getting paid $400 or $500 an hour to do it. And so some mediations may start at 8 o'clock in the morning and go till midnight. That will never happen with a settlement conference with a judge ever. So if you're preparing for a settlement conference, understand that your opportunities to talk to the judge are somewhat limited. In mediation, at least as far as I can tell, mediators are willing to sit and listen to everybody as long as it takes.
Yeah, the dollar or the $20 or the $100 bill tends to very much keep mediators in the game. That being said, I've done a couple of mediations on the weekend, not just to avoid my wife and my teenage children, but just as a little when a case really needed it. And I have been amazed by the point that I think Judge Yates implicitly makes, which is time in is sometimes the most important thing that a mediator can do. So right away, the judge doesn't necessarily have that, because the judge has 200, 300, 500, 1,000 cases. And of those cases, some of them have to be tried. Some of them the judge has to hear oral argument on. The judge isn't always wearing her settlement hat. So you aren't going to get the same amount of time. And I think to a fairly high confidence interval, that it's harder for us as judges to shed our evaluative hat. Even when we do, just as I said, we're looking for those entry points of inflection. I'm sure we have our tells where we sort of signal what we think about the case, even when we are performing facilitative mediation. So, if you just want to have a conversation, a long conversation, which often brokers settlement, the mediation process might be more helpful. And that's in cases perhaps where there's a pre-existing and perhaps a post-litigation relationship, a family relationship, for example. A judicial settlement conference, it's really just the case. And again, the judge may have her evaluative hat on a little bit more than in the mediation process.
Thank you. In almost all cases, we as the experts are working for one of the parties. And when we try to be of help in settling a case, it becomes very difficult sometimes because we're viewed as an advocate for that party, even though we are not, or we try not to be. Is it possible to bring in an expert, a valuation expert, and as an advisor or neutral, is someone who can assist in the mediation process, not representing a particular party? And then if you agree that it can be done, how can it be done? How do we get the information that we need to be of help if we're not going to be involved in the specific valuation in the case?
So that really is a tool of the lawyers and the judge agreeing that there will be a valuation expert to serve as a neutral. I don't think the retained expert can suddenly put on the neutral hat at the expense of the other side. I don't think you were suggesting that, Alan. So I guess the question is, how does the valuation expert get that entry point? And I think that's first of all, it's a marketing technique, and I know we wanted to talk a little about marketing at the end. Not that two guys who have worked for the government for the last 50 years between us really know as much about marketing, but we'll certainly give some tips. Nevertheless, I think that neutral expert is very much a product of the judge really cajoling the lawyers and saying, hey, look, folks, you all want to have your own experts, you all want to have an adversary proceeding, no problem. Why don't we think about having one neutral expert who you can both talk to, but either A, accept the results of that process, or have a limited framed issue hearing with maybe each of you get an hour of questioning to elucidate your own positions vis-a-vis the neutrals process. But the neutral expert, I think the retention of a neutral expert is the product of the judge and the lawyers rather than the expert coming in and forcing their way in.
Yeah, we have the authority under the rules of evidence in virtually every jurisdiction to appoint an expert if we want. But I was pretty reluctant to do that because I'm just imposing another layer of cost on the litigation when I do that. If I'm fairly confident that each side has a competent expert on valuation, I'm going to be pretty reluctant to reach out on my own and appoint somebody else to add another expert to the mix, albeit one who is court appointed and, at least in theory, exists to provide an objective view for the court. If you talk about it, though, in the context of mediation, for example, I don't know why attorneys take the position that almost all the time when they go to mediation, they're going to hire an attorney to be the mediator. Now, there's no doubt that it's become a cottage industry for retired judges and very experienced attorneys to serve as mediators. But particularly in a case where valuation issues are pretty esoteric and there's an awful lot to know, you could suggest to your retaining counsel that you actually, instead of finding an attorney to act as your mediator, that you find some trusted valuation expert with or without a JD to serve as your mediator. And I've always thought that would go a long way to getting a case resolved. The key to mediation isn't so much the title that the mediator has. The key to mediation is whether the mediator actually understands the subject matter, understands the nuances of the case, and has the sort of persuasive power that can bring both sides to an agreement.
That's very insightful. What do you do when the lawyers or the parties are not motivated to settle? What advice can you give us as valuation experts?
We are very good, I think. I don't know if I'm good at too many things, but I think I'm pretty good at encouraging settlement for exactly the reasons that I spoke about at the beginning. And I have not a standard speech, but I have some points that I make at the beginning of every settlement conference. In fact, I have some points I make at the beginning of every pre-settlement conference when I'm trying to get the lawyers and the clients to be of the mindset that we need to have a settlement conference. And among those points are, of course, the systemic point, the cost point, the uncertainty point. So I think that I wouldn't think that's something as much for the expert to worry about. I think the recalcitrance usually comes from the client. So I guess to answer the question then, Alan, to the extent that the expert has a relationship with the client and not with the retaining attorney, the expert could be part of that process of letting the client know all of the reasons why settlement may be preferable. It often is preferable to litigation.
Right. I think Judge Driscoll's right that experienced trial court judges are pretty adept at imposing some pretty subtle pressure on both sides. One of the things that I say when I give my introductory remarks before I start a settlement conference is, if this fails, I'm going to set a trial date as soon as we finish negotiations and they've broken down. And you can expect that trial date will be 6 to 8 weeks down the road. So I don't want any more horsing around. If we can't settle this thing today, we're going to go to trial and get this case off the docket. And I think that has the effect of focusing the minds of everybody, because I've never understood this, but in commercial litigation, there are all sorts of people who seem to think that delay just for the sake of delay is beneficial. And I've never understood that way of thinking, except that it allows everybody to just keep billing as the case drags on and on and on.
Thank you. We're going to be moving along. I'm going to skip this slide and go to this one, which talks about recommendations for a valuation expert who wants to learn more about being a financial mediator. Is there a formal training program to learn these mediation skills? And how can a valuation expert then promote their services as a mediator? Your thoughts would be great.
So mediation training, I don't know if there's formal financial mediation training, but mediation training is offered through just about every local bar association, at least on an annual basis. I know our county bar offers a 24-hour session, which then those who have completed it get on the court-appointed mediation list. Now, that's a broad mediation list, not just financial mediation, but there is some formal mediation training, which again applies to any kind of mediation. And it ties back into what Judge Yates spoke about earlier about the importance of understanding facilitative mediation, which again is not something that judges do naturally. It's something that human beings do naturally, because we need to move things to resolution. So just the skills to be in the room and to listen is a very important skill. In terms of how to promote yourself, I'll just tie into what we just heard at the end of the previous segment from Chris Milne, which is to be available whether to your colleagues, to be available to retaining counsel, to be available to the court. And 90% of life is showing up. Show up at bar association events, show up where at events like this or at conferences like this, and note what you are able to do. And I guess tying into what Chris Milne said also, is that not everything will necessarily be financially rewarding, at least in the first instance. So recognize that you're sowing seeds and you may be harvesting them perhaps after you'd like to, but they always can be harvested with a little bit of patience down the road.
I'll start out by echoing what Judge Driscoll said about training for mediation generally. In Michigan, it's a 40-hour class. When he says 24 hours and I say 40, that doesn't mean continuously. Usually, our 40-hour program is a full week. It's 8 hours a day for 5 days, and it's rigorous. And I know that you'll think if you go through it, a lot of the time doesn't seem to be especially well spent. But to go through the training, I think, is one way to start getting your foot in the door. Then, as far as getting hired to be a mediator, you should know that in most jurisdictions, mine included, we judges cannot steer cases to mediators. There's this mistaken view that if you befriend a judge, the judge will start spinning off all sorts of mediation work to you. Under our court rules, we're flatly prohibited from being involved in selecting mediators. And there's a good reason for that. There are a lot of judges who I'm sure would just give them all to their brother-in-law or, their best buddy from back when they were in practice. And what we'd like to see as judges in an abstract sense is the cream rise to the top. I mean, there's nothing that makes me happier than having lawyers choose a mediator who's really adept at settling cases, because that means we don't have to worry about seeing the case again. And we have several of those in our jurisdiction. And the way that you develop a reputation is simply to get the business and do it well. I suppose that the doing it well part is easy. The getting the business is a harder thing. And as Judge Driscoll says, a lot of it's just a matter of networking. I was in private practice for 4 years. I maintained a huge number of people as friends who would refer cases to me. And I learned very quickly that if you get a case referred to you and you do a nice job on it, you'll get more. If you get a case referred to you and you do a lousy job on it, you won't get any more from that attorney. And so really, when you get the opportunity to serve as a mediator, do the very best you can. Be well prepared coming in, and your reputation will grow quickly.
That is wonderful advice. I wanted to invite Michael Kaplan to join us if he's online. He had some comments to make, I think, about the future of this whole process. Are you there, Michael?
I am here. Thank you, Judge Yates and Judge Driscoll, for your perspectives and comments. One thing that came to my mind as you were sharing your thoughts today is that, we live in a world, we as experts are in a world where we learn through education and practice and continuing education. We learn our discipline. We learn damages measurement. We learn intellectual property. We learn business valuation. And then we also, those of us who like the litigation environment and want to pursue our careers in litigation, what we do is we learn how to give expert testimony, and we learn court rules, and we learn the dynamics of being an expert and preparing for court and preparing a report. But one thing where I believe there has been too little attention paid is, instead of preparing experts for battle, or in addition to preparing them for battle, they need to be prepared for the settlement process. We think in terms of doing our work and then going to deposition and then to trial. And if we can get the experts to think in terms of being facilitators in the dispute resolution, and this doesn't even mean as a mediator, even if the expert is attending the mediation on behalf of one or the other party or both of them. I think back, virtually every time that I've been invited to attend and participate in the mediation process, or I've had one of my colleagues from the office attend the mediation process, the case settles either that day or within the next couple of days. Unfortunately, too many attorneys out there will call their expert and say, we're going to mediation next Thursday. Don't do any more work until after we know if we've got the case settled or not. And if we don't settle it, then I'll call you and we'll gear up for trial. But the expert's excluded from that process. I really think we need to do a better job of educating our attorneys as to the value that we can provide in the mediation process. And that is in a role other than being the mediator. And I think it's an area that is largely untapped, and there's a lot of work and a lot of value that we can bring to the table. So with that as a foundation, stay tuned. There are going to be NACFA conferences this year, and we are going to continue this line of education. Our judges who have brought so much in the past, we're looking forward to their bringing that much more at our conferences. And also at the same time, we are pursuing the development of educational programs and courses that will enable us to develop our skills so that we can be better professionals in the resolution process and assist our clients in getting the cases settled, so we don't have so many failed settlements and have to take them into court and spend our clients' money.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Your Honors and Michael. And I'm
Thank you,
sorry
Ali.
that we went over.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Your Honors, for being here, Michael and Alan. I'm now back on the program. Just I was actually in a settlement conference, and that's why I couldn't get here earlier. So we'll see where it all goes. But on to the next segment, we're going to move to talking a bit about standards with Nainesh Shah, and I hope that I got it right, from Complete Advisors. He's in a valuation firm, has been in the industry for almost 3 decades now, has presented not to nonprofits, macroeconomic conditions, capital markets, portfolio constructions, risk management, a lot of different things in that arena. Nainesh, are you there? Let's see.
Nainesh, you may be muted.
I see the slides.
I was muted and I couldn't get back to my Zoom session, but I'm here now.
Well, welcome. And I'll let you take
Nice
it away.
introduction. Yes, it's always nice to hear from judges and get the insight of how things work in mediation. What I thought I would do today is touch on standards. So I'm on a standards board since last summer, and one of the main job that standards was, along with a lot of other functions, is to make sure that members understand standards properly. So one of the forum that we have is members can ask questions, and that question can we make sure that we explain answers properly and then post it on the web. So I thought I'll touch on a couple of those questions and then take it from there. One of the questions that came up was, can we build a spreadsheet that is connected with either calculation report or conclusion of a value report, or is it not part of that? And the answer is, if you are using a professional judgment, then you have to follow standards. If you are not using a professional judgment, then Article 3C, which is connected with other services, applies. Overall, you have to follow ethics. Overall, you want to make sure that you follow ethics of our NACVA, the standards. But if you are applying or creating a spreadsheet where you're using a professional judgment, then you have to make sure that you follow developmental standard, reporting standard, and if it is calculation of value or conclusion of value. So 2 different aspects, professional judgment applied or not applied, and whether, how do you, what standards do you? This other question that was raised, which was, are we required to follow uniform standard of professional appraisals USPAP? And as our standard, NACVA standard, we don't have to follow USPAP. But so we follow NACVA standard, but we also have to follow any other standards or rules or regulation that applies in the jurisdiction that we are practicing. And so if it is USPAP, then we have to apply that. If there's something else that we have to apply that. But by our standard, we are not required to follow USPAP. So that's the second question. And one more that I have picked up is, can you build your own valuation approach or something that is not peer reviewed? As you know, NACVA doesn't require you to follow certain valuation methods or approaches. So it can be market approach or asset approach or income approach. You are supposed to look at all of that. You're supposed to look at some combination of that and then use your professional judgment to apply. It doesn't tell you whether you cannot use your own approach. What it does tell you is that somebody else of equal knowledge should be able to replicate. So you want to make sure that you describe your method completely, and somebody else should be able to replicate using your numbers. You can also use rule of thumb, but that's not one of the methods. It can be just a reference point. And another thing that you have to keep in mind is, does this will this fly in the court or in some kind of a challenge? Usually it's hard to see your own, which is not a peer-reviewed approach. It's very hard to see. If it is explained well and other people can replicate it, you will be able to use it according to the standard. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of questions that came up and also encourage everybody to go and ask questions. If you have a question that's connected with standards, we take a lot of care to respond properly and quickly, and just raise it on the website. And there's a question that you can send to the board, and we will respond to it. Also, I wanted to show something else. So we had a meeting last Thursday about all the topics connected with the professional standard body, and one of the questions that came up was the site was not really designed in a way where we can find things easily. And I'm very happy and impressed actually to report that it's redesigned. The page which is connected with professional standards is redesigned, and now if you look, all the standards connected information is right there on the top. Standards board has spent a lot of energy coming up with the comparison chart between different valuation organization standards and us. So USPAP or AICPA or SA, and that's right there up on the top. And then glossary of terms, which as you all know is not required for us to follow every term, but it's also there, and its comparison chart is there. So have a look and check out the frequently asked question on the page, and hopefully we'll add more value on from the standards board. Thank you.
Thank you, Nainesh, for that. It's always helpful to make sure that we are up to date on this. And thanks to the standards board. So, and so we're gonna shift over to our final segment of the program today, and that is around growing and building your practice. Dimitri, Yimga is going to be spending some time with Darrell, Dorrell, and David Fein, talking about why valuation software isn't a black box. Are y'all in the house right now, in the room?
Yep.
All right.
Yep,
I'll let you guys take it away. I'm really interested to hear about this one.
Thanks. Happy New Year, everyone, and thanks for being with us today. It's my pleasure to have a discussion today with Darrell, Dorrell, and David Fein on why valuation software isn't a black box. Dorrell is a founding partner of Financial Forensic located in Lake, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this one right, Oswego, Oregon. His experience includes more than 35 years of very complex and highly specialized financial guidance for a wide variety of business and industry, ranging from 14,500 through one-person operation. Darrell is also nationally recognized within his profession as a speaker and author, and has delivered more than 100 addresses to many national bodies on various financial topics. David Fein is the CEO of ValueSource, Key Value Data, and MBA Ware. ValueSource was founded in 1986, and since then has become the leading provider of business valuation software in the world. David is an entrepreneur, a world traveler, and adventurer. And fun fact, at 16, he was the second youngest person ever to set foot on the South Pole. And at age 25, he fulfilled a long-time dream by sailing across the Pacific to Tahiti on a 34-foot sailboat. Wow. Darrell and David, thanks so much for participating to Around the World Valuation today. And
Sure.
also, as a disclosure, I am also a ValueSource valuation product user.
Delighted to be here.
Thank you. So I think we can start. David, can you tell us more about ValueSource and what are the valuation products the company offers?
Sure. Well, it's interesting. This is actually our 37th year, which is a bit of a scary number for me. It's been a very long time. And, originally our goal was to help automate and standardize the process. And, one of the things that people sort of have issues with or questions about is the valuation software providing expertise? And, how does it do that? And our thought and feeling has always been, we don't provide the expertise. Valuators do that. We just help automate the process. And that's really what we do. So we have a suite of valuation software, from a light version to a pro version, and also a report writer that helps automate and standardize the process. And really, there's three things we have in mind. One is saving you time. Two is, I think if you look at how much time you spend working on Excel templates, copying those kind of things when you do a new engagement, especially on the word end, you're copying and pasting. I think many people don't realize how much time that takes. And so if you can automate and standardize that piece of it, you can spend more time where your expertise really shines through. So that's really our goal.
Nice. And what makes ValueSource software, evaluation software different? I mean, and this is to both of you, actually.
Well, I think probably the biggest thing we realized long ago that, valuation is, there's a lot of standards, there's a lot of prescribed procedures, but it's also an art. So, it's not like an accounting package where, everything is prescribed and you know how to do it every time in the same way. So we built everything around Microsoft Office. In other words, it's all built in Excel and Word. So it's completely transparent, it's completely flexible, it's completely customizable. So we found that valuators need that. I know Darrell has been using our stuff for years, and he can talk about his thoughts on that and the reasons it's built in Office.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more also from Darrell on that.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Dimitri. I appreciate that. And I have indeed been using it for years. For a little bit of background, I've been around for a long time doing evaluation work. And see Dimitri nodding his head, I'm an old guy. When valuation first started coming out, evaluation so-called software, I started collecting the various packages and comparing and contrasting them. And there were at least 6, maybe up to 10, depending upon how you count it. And over a period of many years, it was very clear that ValueSource was indeed the leader at that point in time. And that's evidenced by the fact that ValueSource is still here. Many and several others have attempted to penetrate the market, have not been effective at it, and don't exist. And they still have periodic attempts at it. But ValueSource is the one with the deep roots, and that makes a huge difference.
So I know a lot of people usually, one of the complaints that I've heard a lot usually is that people say, well, someone is using evaluation software, it's paper can, it's just. So can you explain, is it really true, like with ValueSource valuation software, do you just plug the number and just generate like a report? Like what? How does it work?
Go ahead, David.
Okay. Well, obviously most of the methodologies, there's a standard body of knowledge in valuation, which, you guys talk about here, talk about everywhere else, talk about webinars and conferences. So what we've done is we've implemented the body of knowledge in a specific way. There's hundreds of assumptions. So, you don't have to build the models, but you're making all the decisions. So that's sort of on the Excel part of it. And there's also data integration. So it integrates data very easily, which is also a big time saver. And one of the big time savers is the report. I know Darrell uses the report writer, and the report writer automates and standardizes that piece too. So, you can go in and customize any of this. We encourage people to go in and customize the spreadsheets, make it, your look and feel, if you have slightly different ways you're doing things to do that, especially in the reports. We encourage you to take your reports and hook them up to our analysis or do a blended kind of a thing. So it really is a customized approach to valuation. But if you took every valuator's spreadsheets out there, and we've looked at dozens, if not hundreds of them, people are doing very similar things, right? The income approach is the income approach. The market approach is pretty much the market approach. So the application of the models tends to be very similar. We just help automate and standardize the whole thing and tie it all together.
Correct. And I like that you say that, because like for me, like I said, I use the product as well. One of the things that I really like is that it's a spreadsheet. I mean, it's not a software like most of the other proprietary, which I've used a couple of them as well. And the main reason wasn't really to find something to do the work for me. It was just to find something to make things just be efficient, to save time. And one thing that you mentioned, which I really like, is that data integration, where you can, for example, pull data from like Basecamp and you just load it straight up into your spreadsheet. And again, it's Excel. I mean, you can exit the mode, you can manipulate it the way you want, you can change things there. When I started, I was using a spreadsheet, which is how I learned, where we build all that. It's not too different from this one, from what I found out, except for the fact that it really just streamlined the whole thing. And with the report writer as well, where you can, you go there and you go line by line and just edit and adjust it to be kind of like what my report should be. So I'm in control in a way. I don't know, Darrell, what do you think?
And the thing that I find amusing is the only term I can think of right now, is that people who don't use a software package like BVM or Value Pro and so forth, sometimes deride it as a black box, saying, well, I just use Excel. Now, two things about that. When you start to get more than 10 calculations in an Excel model, the likelihood of error starts to grow exponentially. And I do mean exponentially. The second thing about that I find confusing, people who tend to rely on Excel don't realize that there's an underlying layer of calculations that resides at Microsoft, which is the same thing that ValueSource has. They have underlying calculations that rely on a baseline there. So the likelihood of error is more than enough for anyone who's trying to be correct and accurate, is enough for them to switch to a package. Now, I could talk for a long time. A case right now we just worked on, opposing counsel had an expert, very experienced expert, who was using their own Excel-based package, and we found a lot of errors in it and pointed it out. They'd used that many times in trial. So if for no other reason than you're risk averse, and there are many other reasons than that, like you pointed out, Dimitri, I would strongly argue to use David's tool, and we get nothing out of that other than the years of trying it and trusting it, relying upon it, getting their guidance and so forth.
David, anything?
Well, yeah, I would just like to say this. I mean, I know everyone is not going to, switch to our software. We've had thousands and thousands of users over the year, but a lot of people are, going to use Excel and Word. I get that. But, I think people should spend a little time thinking about quality control, automating, like Darrell said, if there's more than a few dozen calculations. The truth is there's hundreds of calculations in your spreadsheets and they're complicated. So, what is your quality control process, especially if there's more than one person in the firm or there's more than one location? How do you manage and control those templates in the Word files and reports too? And once they're all done, how do you quality control all those things? Those are all things that are really important that I think, the ValueSource software really does. But like I said, if you're going to use your Excel models, I think you really need to think about, you really are a software developer in sorts, or developing these complicated Excel sheets, these complicated Word reports. Have you really thought about how all that works and how you're going to get quality and standardization and efficiency, like realization rates? How much time are you wasting? And are there ways to automate that thing? And I know there's people in the industry who have spent a lot of time automating their own Excel spreadsheets. But they spent, an incredible amount of time and energy doing it. So, Darrell wrote an article a while ago called, the build or buy decision, and all those things go into it. But if you're not going to use software, think about those aspects in your own practice, in your own software, in your own Excel spreadsheets. How do you manage all that?
Yeah, well said.
And what we could do, I think, Shonda will probably arrange that. If you want, Shonda, we can send a copy of that article to you and forward
That's a
it.
good idea. Yeah.
And I will say, I published about 85 different articles over the years, mostly peer reviewed, some very large, some very small. And that one probably been, I don't know how many years it's been out, but I've received dozens of inquiries from people just at random saying, well, tell me more about this. And there's no doubt whatsoever that if for only the reason of being risk averse, that you should definitely acquire a package.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Well, so just a note, we're running out of time. So David, how do one go about getting the software?
Oh, it's really simple. You can go to NACVA-valuesource.com to look at it online. You can call NACVA and talk to anybody on the customer service side over there, and they can talk to you about software. You can try it. Anybody going through the NACVA courses can get a free trial of it. So yeah, it's pretty easy to figure out. And there is a learning curve there. You have to, go through evaluation or two before you sort of get the hang of it. But, since all the principles are exactly what you all do anyway, most of it is familiar. It's just sort of the subtleties of, what does this assumption mean or that assumption, or how does it connect the dots? But, you can call us and get answers to all those things.
Awesome. Any last word you want to share, you both, with our attendees?
Well, I would make one comment. We have used ValueSource and all various iterations of the versions for several years, and we've done all kinds of valuation litigation, from solvency issues to gifting transactions and so forth, and never encountered a situation where ValueSource would not accommodate it. So it's very flexible too.
Yeah, I don't have enough experience like you, but yes, I haven't encountered a case where I couldn't use the software. Yeah.
And if anyone, wants to try it out or talk about it, give me a call. I'm happy to do so. I get nothing out of that, other than perhaps goodwill from David, but you can't write a check on that. So,
well, thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate you. And thank you for everyone attending the webinar with us. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dimitri.
Thank you.
David and Darrell. Just a quick story of why it's important. I remember one time, and good news, it was in a deposition. It wasn't in trial. Just a summation formula on an income statement. And we did sum, and it picked up the year. So all of a sudden we were $2,000 off on every number, and we're going, why? And it's just, sometimes you're going fast and you don't notice it. And it's close enough that it doesn't jump out until the opposing counsel sees it and you go, no. Now you're getting hammered. So. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all for attending the first AVW for the new year 2023. We've got a lot in store this year and for you. And our next AVW is going to be at the same time, February 27th. So join us and get the word out, and let's keep boosting the industry, boosting the quality of the work we do. And I look forward to seeing you in the session on February 27th. You guys have a great day.